considerations for natty athletes.
So my big thing with this is don't worry about it. I used to read all sorts of stuff, saying different. Be if you're natural, blah blah blah. You've got to consider there isn't any. Just train. Just do what makes you better. There's I don't think there's anything really to come on to, except maybe that if you're natural, you can probably handle more work, which is counterintuitive to everything you've ever read. But you'd generally be recovering a little bit better. I don't know if that's a sympathetic thing, sympathetic parasympathetic thing. I don't know if you'll generally be lifting a little bit less load. But yeah, I wouldn't change anything at all. And the thing is, if you're natural or you're not natural, it's either one or the other. So it's not like you can, I was natural for a bit and then I wasn't, and then I was natural for a bit and then I wasn't. So you're only kind of getting one shot at changing your training, if you know what I mean. So I think it's just keep it simple. The same principles will work. I don't think there's many considerations at all.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a loaded question, really, because like considerations for a natty athlete, you haven't known any different.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. You don't need to do anything different. Just do what you're doing now, and then if you decide that you want to take performance enhancing drugs at some point, then you can maybe consider like. Well, let's talk about it, because I'm sure we don't need to name anybody.
It's the most uncomfortable chairs I've ever sat on.
But like, what are things that you've noticed in, like, say, coaching people who are like don't take gear or do take PEDs?
What have I noticed? They get injured more. If they are, they lose their head more often. They expect things to be easier, and then sometimes when they aren't easier, that can throw them off. That's a big one. And then I'd say the big things, if you're off, not training as hard as when you're on, that's a massive thing. So you lose a lot of time when you could be getting better, where you're not as strong. So you think, I'm not as strong, so I'm not going to bother training. See that a lot. Or not training as intensely. And again, that's a great time to do these lighter blocks and more skill-based blocks.
Yeah.
So you can still make different gains in different areas.
I think that's particularly like using your kind of framework or whatever that we've just discussed. Like for people who are, like, say, peaking using gear, peaking towards a comp, and then they hit a peak, and then they're coming off for a bit, or they're cruising or whatever. Like, I find that some people struggle with the kind of setting the goals appropriately and their expectations, like basically coming off or hitting the peak and like keeping engaged, because a lot of people, like, keeping it simple, they come off and they feel like they can't lift what they can do. So what's the point?
Sure.
Whereas actually putting, like, say the, doing the lighter kind of framework that you've said, like it's great because they're not like kind of objective measures to get obsessed with.
You're not testing your numbers as much, like you.
So I think be careful, like, for people taking gear, like, be careful with working at percentages, especially at different phases. Like how you handle percentages as you in a comp, in a peak for a comp is going to be very different to obviously when you're doing a lighter phase and stuff. That
is a good consideration. The same person, when they're on and off, will be different. I don't think there's really much to change between people that either are taking something or aren't. But you yourself, you're going to feel different. So I think that's something to work on. If suddenly you feel a bit flat, obviously your energy levels are lower. You just don't feel as strong mentally as much as anything else. You need to be aware of that to plan your training in.
Yeah.
So I've seen I've had a client a couple of times, and like, things going back. So I'm like, what are you trying different methods? Like, I've been off gear 6 months. Like, I didn't know you're on. So I was on then when we were hitting PBs, and I've been off.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I had no idea. I've tried figuring everything.
So I think, again, like, it's something that I talk about all the time. Is like, communicate. If you're working with a coach, communicate with your coach. Like, if you're like, say, so someone like Paul, for instance, who, like, quite famously within this niche, like, is natty. Like, don't feel that he's going to, like that you have to keep it from him.
Yeah, chastise. I get that a lot.
I've had it in the past where people haven't told me, and then I found like, like I suppose one of our kind of good characteristics that we have in common in terms of coaching, like we're not judgmental. We don't like have like we don't. Like, I don't even have an opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Like to the point of like, what do you think? Like, we don't actually have an opinion. It's like what we're dealing with in
yeah, of course,
everything, the big picture, right? And how do we get a little bit better for next week? Yeah. So the more data and the more significant things that we know about you, the better the training's going to be. So it goes with anything, like like say beyond like taking gear and stuff. Like if you've got stuff that you're dealing with that's under the surface, if you're struggling with stuff outside of training, if you're struggling with nutrition, if you're struggling with relationships, or you're having a hard time at work, because communicate.
I always make sure I find out what people do as a job, because it's like if you have someone who's a student, and when you're a student, you pretty much a doss around. If you live at home and you just train all day, especially if you're like me, you didn't really care about your degree. You just lived at home, trained all day, you're buzzing. Compared to someone who's a manual labourer 5-6 days a week, they've got 3 kids and a missus. You've got to cut that into account. But if you didn't tell me that, if I assume one because you hadn't told me the other, your program's not going to be optimal. So make sure you tell your coach as much as you can.